The Galactic Concordat was clear. Humanity was never to build warships. The treaty, signed under duress after the disastrous First Contact War, ensured that Earth's people would remain under the watchful eyes of the galactic powers. To the ruling council of the hegemony, humans were unpredictable, aggressive, and too dangerous to be given the tools of war. Their rapid advancements in warfare, despite their relatively primitive technology, had terrified the galactic community. So they were forbidden. No battleships, no destroyers, no fleets. And yet, deep within the frozen wastelands of Titan, beneath the thick, methane-laden clouds, we built. For years, the whispers had spread among the outer colonies. Earth might have surrendered, but its people had not. We knew the hegemony feared us, but we also knew they underestimated us. They thought stripping us of our fleets would make us powerless, that without ships, we would kneel. They were wrong. The project was codenamed Ghost Armada, a fleet of warships built in secret, piece by piece, hidden in the shadows of Saturn's moons. Every part was crafted in civilian yards, then smuggled off-world. Thousands of engineers, pilots, and tacticians working in complete silence, building a force that didn't exist on any star charts. For 30 years, we had played the role of obedient inferiors, bowing our heads to the alien overlords while our people toiled in secrecy. We had memorized their weaknesses, studied their tactics, and analyzed their blind spots. When the time came, we would strike. And that time had arrived. A distress signal had been sent from one of our border colonies, Rexus Prime. The hegemony claimed it was a territorial reassignment. But we knew the truth. The aliens were expanding, and humans were nothing but pests to be moved or exterminated. The High Chancellor of the hegemony, an insectoid nightmare called Vrextal, issued an ultimatum: evacuate or be destroyed. They had no idea what was coming. I stood aboard the Indomitable, the first true human warship in over 3 decades. She was a monster, sleek, predatory, and armed with technology reverse-engineered and improved from our alien oppressors. Every inch of her hull was a testament to human defiance. "All ships report ready," my second-in-command, Lieutenant Diaz, said, barely able to contain his excitement. I looked at the fleet we had built in silence, a force that had no right to exist. The hegemony believed we were weak because they had forced us into submission. They had forgotten one thing about humanity: we never submit. I opened the communications. My voice rang through the fleet. Today, we remind the galaxy who we are. We are the species that defied extinction. We are the ones who turned defeat into victory. We were forbidden from building warships, but we refused to obey. And now the stars will remember the day humanity returned to the battlefield. The response was a roar that shook the very bones of the ship. The fleet moved as one, slipping from Titan's shadows. Engines roared to life, railguns hummed. The forbidden warships of humanity had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The fleet surged forward, engines blazing against the cold emptiness of space. The Indomitable led the charge, followed closely by the Valkyrie, the Iron Fang, and a dozen other warships that had no right to exist. Our ships had been designed in the dark, away from prying alien eyes, built with the knowledge that if we failed, humanity would never get another chance. "ETA to Rexus Prime?" I asked, my voice calm despite the fire burning in my veins. 15 minutes, Lieutenant Diaz reported. Long-range scans show hegemony warships in orbit, at least 10 capital ships, plus smaller escorts. I clenched my fists. They're preparing an orbital bombardment. Diaz's face hardened. If they fire, the colony won't stand a chance. I turned to my comms officer, Ensign Harrow. Open a channel. A moment later, the bridge screen flickered, and the insectoid visage of High Chancellor Vrextal filled the display. His chitinous mandibles twitched, his compound eyes reflecting cold amusement. "Ah," Vrextal rasped, his voice a mix of clicking and guttural tones. "Humans. I must admit, I am surprised. We believed your kind had learned its place after the first contact war." I kept my face impassive. "Withdraw your fleet from Rexus Prime. Now." Vrextal's mandibles curled in what I could only assume was laughter. "You come in your primitive ships, thinking you can dictate terms to the hegemony? Your world is allowed to exist by our mercy alone." I allowed myself a smirk. "Mercy? Is that what you call 30 years of oppression?" I stepped forward. "You think we've been idle, Chancellor? You think we've just been bowing our heads, letting you dictate our future?" Vrextal tilted his head. "You have no warships, no fleet. You are not even allowed to—" I cut him off. "We were forbidden from building warships." I leaned in, letting the weight of my words settle. But we refused to obey. I watched with satisfaction as his mandibles twitched in confusion. His compound eyes darted to something off-screen, and I knew his officers were detecting our fleet for the first time. The Indomitable and her sister ships decloaked, emerging from the void like wraiths. The Ghost Armada, hidden in the shadows for 3 decades, was now very real. Vrextal's posture shifted. This is impossible." "No," I said. "This is humanity." The moment the comm cut, I gave the order. "All ships, attack!" The first salvo struck before the hegemony even had time to react. Kinetic rounds, moving at near light speed, slammed into their lead dreadnought, Krexival. Armor shattered, air ignited. The mighty hegemony warship, once a symbol of their unchallenged power, split apart like glass under a hammer. Panic rippled through their ranks. "They're trying to maneuver," Diaz barked. "They won't get the chance." I pointed at the enemy flagship, Zorvex Prime. "Bring us in close. Fire plasma lances." The Indomitable surged forward, its weapon banks lighting up. Bolts of searing plasma lanced across the void, striking the Zorvex Prime's engines. A chain reaction erupted, sending debris spiraling in all directions. We were winning. For the first time in 3 decades, humans were no longer prey. We were no longer an occupied species. We were warriors once more. But the battle wasn't over yet. "Sir!" Ensign Harrow cried out. "They're calling in reinforcements. Multiple warp signatures inbound." I stared at the screen as a new fleet materialized. Bigger. Deadlier. The full force of the hegemony was arriving. I took a deep breath. The odds had just changed. Good. Then we'll show them why they should have never underestimated us. The battlefield was chaos. The wreckage of shattered warships floated like drifting tombstones, fires burning even in the vacuum of space. The first wave of the hegemony's fleet had been decimated, but now the real challenge had arrived. The reinforcements had warped in like an eclipse, blotting out the stars with their sheer numbers. 40 warships, massive reinforced battlecruisers, armed with the kind of firepower that had once forced humanity into submission. The bridge of the Indomitable was tense. Red lights flashed as damage reports scrolled across the screens. Our fleet had taken a beating, but we were still in the fight. Lieutenant Diaz cursed under his breath. "That's the entire hegemony Third Armada." "Looks like they decided we're a real threat," I muttered. Ensign Harrow paled as she read the incoming transmissions. "Sir, they're broadcasting a system-wide ultimatum." She swallowed hard. "Total human surrender. No negotiations." I laughed. Actually laughed. The idea that we'd fought this hard just to kneel now? It was so absurd that I couldn't help myself. "No," My voice was firm. "We don't surrender." I turned back to my officers, looking each one in the eye. "We didn't come all this way just to survive. We came to win." Diaz exhaled sharply and nodded. "Then let's make these bastards bleed." The enemy fleet opened fire first. Green lances of particle beams cut through the void, slamming into our forward lines. A smaller ship, the Valkyrie, took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded in a blinding burst of light. The Indomitable shook violently as enemy rounds smashed into our shields. Alarms blared, metal groaned, but we weren't out yet. "Return fire!" I barked. Railguns roared. Plasma torpedoes streaked forward, weaving through the battlefield. The Iron Fang launched its experimental gravitic warhead, a weapon that crumpled space around its detonation point. A hegemony cruiser imploded in on itself, its own mass crushing it like a tin can. Still, they kept coming. "Sir, we can't fight them head-on forever," Diaz said. "We're outnumbered 4-1. "I know," I murmured. "We need to change the battlefield." My mind raced. We needed an edge, something the hegemony wasn't expecting. And then as I stared at the sensor data, I saw it, a gravitational anomaly. "Titan's gravity well," I whispered. Then, louder, "Helm!" Full burn towards Titan. The crew hesitated for only a moment before obeying. The Indomitable and our remaining warships fired their thrusters, pulling hard towards Saturn's largest moon. The hegemony followed, just as I'd hoped. They didn't understand yet, but they would. As we entered Titan's gravitational pull, our ships maneuvered with practiced precision. We had trained for this, designed our vessels with it in mind. The hegemony? They had no experience fighting in Saturn's chaotic gravity fields. Their formation faltered. Their ships, massive and slow, struggled to compensate for the shifting gravitational tides. And that's when we struck. Fire at will. Kinetic rounds, plasma lances, and torpedoes rained hell upon the disoriented enemy fleet. A dozen ships went up in flames before they even had time to react. The tide was turning again, but the battle was far from over. The Indomitable rocked violently as a hegemony dreadnought. Vrexcal locked onto us and fired a direct hit. Sparks showered from the ceiling. The lights flickered. Shields were dropping fast. "We can't take another hit like that," Diaz shouted. I gritted my teeth. We needed a way to take that monster down, or we'd all be dead in minutes. Then a new voice crackled over the comms. "This is the Defiance, coming in hot." My heart nearly stopped. That ship wasn't part of our fleet. It wasn't even supposed to exist. And yet it did. A massive human warship, bigger than anything we had built before, emerged from the shadow of Titan. A true battleship, bristling with weaponry that should have been impossible. My chest tightened. The Defiance was our last secret, a ship built not just for battle, but for war. It opened fire. The Vrexcal, the mightiest ship in the hegemony's fleet, didn't even get the chance to return fire before it was reduced to glowing slag. The Defiance had arrived. And now, the real war was about to begin. The arrival of the Defiance sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The massive warship, the pinnacle of human engineering, had been kept a secret even from most of our own forces. Built deep within the Kuiper Belt, hidden away from hegemony spies, it was humanity's trump card. A ship that should not exist. Yet here it was, turning the tide of battle in an instant. The Defiance fired again, unleashing its primary weapon, a fusion-laced railgun slug the size of a city bus. The projectile tore through space at an unfathomable velocity, striking a hegemony battleship dead center. The alien vessel, designed to withstand siege warfare, shattered like glass, its armor peeling away before it detonated in a chain reaction of explosions. The enemy fleet hesitated. Their advantage in numbers meant nothing if they couldn't withstand our firepower. "This is Captain Reynolds of the Defiance." A deep, steady voice came over the comms. "Need a hand, Indomitable?" I exhaled, shaking off the momentary shock. "Reynolds, you magnificent bastard, took your time." "We like to make an entrance," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Let's finish this." With the Defiance in the fight, the battle transformed into a massacre. The hegemony, so confident in their overwhelming power, was now scrambling for survival. The Indomitable surged forward alongside our remaining ships, unleashing everything we had. Plasma torpedoes streaked through the void, railgun slugs punched through enemy hulls, and our fighter squadrons weaved through the chaos, picking off crippled vessels. The hegemony's third armada, the force meant to crush humanity once and for all, was crumbling. "Sir," Ensign Harrow shouted, eyes wide, "they're retreating." I looked at the tactical display. She was right. The remaining hegemony ships were pulling back, their formation shattered. Even their command ship, a monstrous dreadnought at the rear of their fleet, was turning away. They were running. For the first time in history, the hegemony was retreating from humans. The bridge erupted in cheers. The ghosts of every colony they had burned, every life they had taken, roared in our hearts as we watched them flee. But I wasn't satisfied. "Negative," I said coldly. "We do not let them escape." The bridge quieted. Lieutenant Diaz turned to me, surprised. "Sir?" I met his gaze. "They'll be back, Diaz. If we let them go now, they'll rebuild, regroup, and return with 10 times the force." My voice hardened. "We finish this. Here, now." Diaz's expression shifted, a slow, dangerous smile forming. "Aye, Captain." I opened the fleet-wide comms. "All ships, pursue and annihilate." Like a pack of wolves, we fell upon the retreating fleet. The Defiance led the charge, cutting down ships before they could jump to warp. The Iron Fang and Valkyrie fired precise volleys, striking engines, preventing any escape. The final ship to fall was their command dreadnought, a towering behemoth, its hull scarred and burning, desperately trying to reach the jump point. We didn't let it. The Indomitable closed in, our railguns glowing with energy. I opened a direct channel. "High Chancellor Vrextal." My voice was steady, even. "Your empire ends today." The insectoid creature appeared on the screen, his mandibles twitching in rage. "You think you have won?" he hissed. "You think this battle means anything? The hegemony spans thousands of systems. You are nothing but a nuisance." I leaned forward. "Then why are you running?" His mandibles clicked in fury, but before he could respond, I gave the order. "Fire!" The railguns unleashed their fury. The dreadnought's hull buckled under the impact, explosions rippling through its structure. For a moment, it seemed to hang in space, its massive frame defying gravity itself. Then, in a brilliant flash, it was gone. Silence filled the bridge. The battle was over. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what we had done. We had not only defied the hegemony, we had defeated them, but I knew this was only the beginning. "Sir," Diaz said, his voice quieter now, "what happens next?" I looked out at the wreckage, at the burning remnants of an empire that had tried to break us. "Now," I said. "Now we take the fight to them." The Ghost Armada had revealed itself, and humanity was done hiding. The war had begun. The remnants of the hegemony's fleet were gone, scattered debris floating in the cold void, their empire humiliated. For the first time in history, humanity had struck back, not just in defiance, but in total victory. The Third Armada had been annihilated. Their High Chancellor's flagship was dust, and the galaxy had just learned a terrifying truth. Humans were not prey. We were predators. I stood at the Indomitable's bridge, watching as our fleet regrouped. We had won, but there was no time to celebrate. This was only the first battle. The hegemony would retaliate. When they returned, it wouldn't be with one fleet. It would be with everything they had. "We need to move," I said. "Now." Diaz nodded, already anticipating my next orders. "Where?" I turned to the galactic map, staring at the vast expanse of enemy-controlled space. "To the heart of the hegemony." Silence filled the bridge as my officers absorbed the meaning of my words. "Their homeworld?" Diaz finally asked, his voice hushed. I nodded. "They expect us to retreat, to run back to Earth, reinforce and hide." I glanced at the crew, meeting their gazes one by one. "But we're not doing that." A slow grin spread across his face. "We're taking the war to them." Excitement rippled through the bridge. For decades we had been forced to live under their rule, bending the knee to an empire that saw us as nothing more than a nuisance. Now, for the first time, we had the chance to end them. But it wouldn't be easy. "The hegemony controls thousands of worlds," Ensign Harrow said, her voice careful. "Even if we hit their capital, it won't end the war overnight." I nodded. True, but it will break them, their government, their morale, their belief in their own invincibility. Captain Reynolds's voice came over the fleet-wide comms. "So what's the plan, Indomitable? You lead the charge, or do we have a little more subtlety in mind?" I smirked. "A bit of both." I pulled up the star charts, highlighting a series of systems. "They think we're just some rogue insurgents, an annoyance to be crushed. They don't yet realize that humanity is done kneeling." I traced a path through the hegemony's outer colonies. "We won't hit them head-on, not yet. First, we carve a path through their supply lines, burn their shipyards, cripple their infrastructure." Diaz nodded. "Bleed them dry before the killing blow." "Exactly." We would fight like humans always had, dirty, relentless, and without mercy. The hegemony had the advantage in raw numbers, but they were slow, arrogant, and dependent on rigid command structures. We were unpredictable, adaptive, and we would make them afraid. I looked around the bridge, taking in the hardened expressions of my crew. None of them hesitated. Every single one of them had lost something to the hegemony. Families displaced, colonies destroyed, lives ruined. Now, they had a chance for revenge. I exhaled. Set course for the Dracos shipyards. The Draco system was a critical manufacturing hub for the hegemony's war machine. Taking it out would cripple their fleet production, buying us time to move deeper into their territory. The engines of the Indomitable hummed as our fleet prepared for the next phase. As I looked out at the stars, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. The war had begun, and humanity was just getting started. The journey to Dracos was tense, filled with an electric anticipation that ran through every member of the fleet. We weren't just on the run, we were on the attack. For decades, humans had been forced to operate in the shadows, but now we moved with purpose, a storm cutting through the dark. The Dracos shipyards were one of the largest military production facilities in the hegemony, responsible for assembling entire battle fleets. If we could take it out, we wouldn't just cripple their war machine. We'd send a message. The hegemony wasn't invincible. "We're approaching the system," Ensign Harrow reported. "Long-range scans show heavy fortifications, orbital platforms, defense grids, automated turrets." She swallowed. "And a fleet." I stepped forward, my fists clenching. "How big?" Diaz exhaled through his teeth. "Not as large as the Third Armada, but still formidable. 2 dreadnoughts, 6 battlecruisers, and at least 20 support ships." He glanced at me. They were expecting trouble. Of course they were. After what we did at Rex's Prime, the hegemony had no doubt scrambled to protect key infrastructure. The days of catching them completely off guard were over. But that didn't mean we couldn't win. "They think we'll engage them head-on," I murmured. "A brute force assault like any other species would try." Diaz smirked. "But we're not any other species." "No," I said, a slow grin forming. "We're humans, and humans fight dirty." I turned to the fleet-wide communication. "All ships, execute Phantom Strike." Our formation shifted immediately. The Indomitable and the heavier warships pulled back, cutting their engines to minimal power, drifting in the void like debris. Meanwhile, our stealth corvettes, small, nearly undetectable ships, slipped forward, vanishing into the darkness. The hegemony fleet held its position near the shipyards, unmoving, confident. They knew we were here, but they didn't know how we would strike. That hesitation would cost them. Minutes passed. The silence was deafening. Then, suddenly, boom! Explosions erupted within the enemy fleet. The stealth corvettes had slipped past their outer defenses, planting charges on key vessels. A battlecruiser erupted into a fireball, secondary explosions ripping it apart. Another ship lost power entirely, its engines flickering before it drifted helplessly into the void. Panic spread through the hegemony fleet. That was our moment. "All ships, attack!" The Indomitable roared forward, railguns spinning up, plasma lances slicing through the dark. The Defiance followed, its heavy cannons tearing through the enemy dreadnought like paper. Fighters swarmed around the battlefield, weaving between wreckage, striking where the hegemony was weakest. Their fleet crumbled. The orbital platforms turned their guns on us. But we were ready. The Iron Fang deployed an EMP charge, sending a pulse through the enemy defenses, shorting out targeting systems. We pressed forward, smashing through what little resistance remained. Soon, the only thing left was the shipyard itself. I opened a direct channel. "This is Captain Hayes of the Indomitable. Surrender now, and you will live." A guttural snarl came through the comms. "You may win this battle, human," the hegemony commander spat, "but you cannot win the war." I leaned forward. "We'll see about that." I cut the transmission. A moment later, the Defiance unleashed its primary cannon. The Draco's shipyards, once a symbol of the hegemony's industrial might, erupted into a superheated inferno. Fire consumed the structure, sending massive chunks of debris spiraling into the planet's atmosphere below. The mission was a success. As I stood on the bridge, watching the destruction unfold, I knew one thing for certain. The war had just begun. And we were winning. The fires of the Draco's shipyards burned behind us as we slipped into deep space, engines low to avoid detection. The battle had been a decisive victory, but there was no time to celebrate. The hegemony would be furious. They would come in force, and if we stayed too long, we'd be overwhelmed. "Casualty reports?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Diaz exhaled. "We lost the Vanguard and Silver Star. Iron Fang took heavy damage but is still operational. Fighter losses were minimal. Most pilots managed to eject." I nodded. "And the enemy?" Harrow scrolled through her tactical readout. "Dracos is completely destroyed. Enemy fleet is wiped out. No survivors." She hesitated. "We intercepted a transmission before we left. The hegemony is aware of what happened. They've declared humanity an existential threat to the galactic order." A slow smirk formed on my lips. Good. For decades they had treated us as insignificant, as if we were nothing more than a minor nuisance. Now? Now they were afraid. Diaz folded his arms. "They'll come for us with everything they have." "Let them," I said, staring out into the void. "We'll take the fight to them first." The fleet drifted in the silent darkness of space, hidden amongst the asteroid fields near the remnants of Dracos. The hegemony would send scouts, trying to determine our next move. They expected us to go on the run, to scatter like prey. We weren't going to run. I brought up the galactic map, staring at the heart of the hegemony. Their core systems were still out of reach, but there were targets that would hurt them. Badly. We strike their supply lines next, I said. Without resources, their fleets are useless. Diaz frowned. Do we have the numbers for that? No, I admitted. Not yet. He studied me for a moment. You have something in mind. I grinned. We're not the only ones who hate the hegemony. The bridge fell silent as they realized what I meant. The hegemony had crushed dozens of species under their rule, ruling through fear and subjugation. But what if those species knew the hegemony could bleed? What if they knew humanity was fighting back? We send a message, I said. A broadcast across every pirate network, every insurgent cell, every world that's ever been under their boot. I turned to Harrow. Let them know the hegemony is vulnerable. Let them know humanity is at war. Harrow's eyes widened. If we do this, we'll be lighting a fuse that can't be undone. I met her gaze. That's the point, Diaz chuckled. Now that's the kind of war I want to fight. Harrow nodded and began transmitting. The message would spread like wildfire, rippling through the underworld of the galaxy. There would be no turning back now. I stood at the bridge, watching the stars. The war had started with a whisper. Now it was about to become a storm. The message spread faster than we could have hoped. Within days, the underworld of the galaxy was ablaze with whispers of humanity's defiance. Pirate lords, warlords, and insurgent leaders who had long lived under the hegemony's shadow now saw a chance, a real chance, to fight back. We weren't just a rogue human fleet anymore. We were the spark of a revolution. The first response came from the Vascari, an amphibious species that had once been a proud warrior culture before the hegemony crushed them. Their chieftain, Gorvak, sent us a simple message. The enemy of my enemy is my blade. Where do you need us? Then came the Drunkai, a reptilian race known for their brutal guerrilla warfare. They had fought the hegemony before and lost. But now they saw a second chance. More came. Small factions, pirate bands, even defectors from the hegemony's own ranks. The uprising had begun. On the bridge of the Indomitable, I stood before the holomap, now littered with new potential allies. We've got volunteers, Diaz said. Not all of them trustworthy, but they all hate the hegemony. That's enough for now, I said. We don't need loyalty. We just need chaos. Harrow scrolled through new transmissions, her eyes widening. Sir, the hegemony is responding. She tapped a few buttons, and a chilling sight appeared on the screen. A massive fleet, unlike anything we had seen before. Hundreds of warships, all mobilizing toward the human colonies. They're preparing a full-scale invasion, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The hegemony wasn't going to just retaliate. They were going to wipe humanity out. Diaz exhaled sharply. They're not taking any chances this time. I clenched my jaw. We had pushed them into a corner. Now they were coming with everything they had. Then we don't let them reach Earth, I said. We stop them before they get the chance. Diaz frowned. With what? That fleet is massive. I looked back at the growing coalition of rebels and outlaws rallying behind us. With everyone. A week later, the battlefield was set. We met the hegemony in the dead void of space, far from any world, at the edges of the Andros expanse, a place filled with dense asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies, a perfect killing ground. The Indomitable sat at the center of our ragtag armada, surrounded by human warships, Vascari raiders, Drunkai strike craft, and countless other vessels that had no business being in a formal fleet. And yet, Here we were. The hegemony fleet loomed before us, stretching out like an unstoppable tide. Their ships were pristine, disciplined, organized. Ours were anything but we weren't here for a fair fight. I opened the comms to the fleet. You all know why we're here. The hegemony thought they could rule us forever, thought they could keep us afraid, thought they could crush anyone who dared to resist. I paused, letting the silence settle. Then, with a slow grin, I finished. They were wrong. A roar of agreement erupted through the comms. Then the battle began. The hegemony fleet surged forward, their disciplined formations tightening, ready to crush us under their superior firepower. But we weren't going to fight them head-on. Instead, we broke apart. The Vascari raiders slipped into the asteroid fields, using their smaller size to harass the flanks. The Drunkai launched boarding parties, their specialized ships ramming into enemy hulls and spilling warriors into the corridors. Our stealth ships darted through the chaos, planting bombs and disrupting formations. And then the Defiance entered the fray. The massive human battleship fired its primary cannon, sending a railgun slug the size of a skyscraper through the heart of an enemy dreadnought. The alien ship imploded instantly. The battle turned into pure chaos. We weren't just fighting the hegemony, we were tearing them apart. For the first time, the galaxy saw what happened when humanity was backed into a corner. For the first time, the hegemony ran. The battle ended with the remnants of their fleet retreating, shattered and humiliated. We had won. But this was only the beginning. Because now, the war wasn't just humanity's. Now the whole galaxy was rising up, and the hegemony was doomed. The war had erupted into something far greater than we had ever imagined. What started as humanity's fight for survival had now become a full-scale galactic revolution. The hegemony had ruled through fear for centuries, but now their empire was crumbling, system by system. The battle at Andros Expanse had shattered the illusion of their invincibility. Word spread faster than their damage control efforts could contain it. Across the galaxy, planets that had once bowed in submission now took up arms. Entire fleets defected. Governors rebelled. The hegemony had spent centuries crushing dissent. But they had never faced all their enemies at once, and we had made sure they did. In the war room aboard the Indomitable, the map of the galaxy no longer looked like a solid block of hegemony control. Red zones, signifying rebellion, had begun to appear across their core systems. "They're stretched thin," Diaz said, studying the latest intelligence reports. "Too many uprisings, too many battles at once. They don't have enough fleets to put down every rebellion." "Which means we don't stop," I said. "We press." Harrow, ever the strategist, frowned. "They still have enough firepower to wipe out entire planets if they get desperate. We need to be careful." I nodded. She was right. The hegemony was losing, but that made them dangerous. "We need to take out their ability to make war," I said. "Their shipyards, their command centers. Hit them where it hurts." That was when Reynolds, captain of the Defiance, leaned in. "You're talking about their capital." The room went silent. Diaz whistled under his breath. "You're not wrong. If we take their homeworld, the rest of the Empire will collapse." Harrow was skeptical. "It won't be that simple?" "No," I admitted. "It won't." The hegemony's homeworld, Zor-Vak Prime, was the most fortified planet in the known galaxy. Massive orbital defenses, an armada of their strongest ships, and planetary shields that could withstand prolonged bombardment. A frontal assault would be suicide, which was why we weren't going to fight fair. I activated the holomap, zooming in on the planet's security grid. "We don't invade," I said. "We infiltrate." The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution, unless you were human. We would use our allies to stage diversions across hegemony space, forcing them to divert fleets and weaken their defenses. Then, while their attention was elsewhere, a small team would slip on to Zorvak Prime and take out their leadership from the inside. No prolonged war, no siege, just one decisive strike to end their rule forever. Reynolds leaned back, grinning. "You are insane," I smirked. "That's why it'll work." Diaz clapped his hands together. "Then let's start making them bleed." The next 2 months were a storm of destruction. The Vaskari hit their supply lines, destroying food production centers and fuel refineries. The Drunkai launched targeted assassinations against key commanders. Human warships ambushed reinforcements, striking from the void and disappearing before retaliation could come. The hegemony was losing control. Their forces were scrambling from system to system, trying to put out fires. But there were too many. And then the final piece fell into place. A hegemony admiral, desperate and furious, made a critical mistake. He abandoned his post at Zorvak Prime to reinforce another collapsing front. Their capital was vulnerable. It was time. I called my officers into the war room. "This is it," I said, voice steady. "This is the moment we end them." Harrow tapped at her screen, pulling up data from our spies inside the capital. "The planetary shield is still active, but their command centers are operating at minimum security. If we move fast, we can take control before they even realize we're there." Diaz grinned. "So, we drop in, take out their leaders, and watch the Empire crumble?" I nodded. "Exactly." Reynolds crossed his arms. "How do we get in?" I pulled up a smuggler's route we had recently acquired from a very reluctant hegemony defector. "We take the ghost path," I said. It was a nearly suicidal route, a maze of asteroid fields and unstable wormholes that only the most daring or insane smugglers used. No sane warship captain would try to navigate it, which meant no one would expect us to. "This is our only shot," I said. "We take Zorvak Prime or we lose everything." No one hesitated. Diaz clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Let's finish what we started." The fleet prepared for the final mission. The end of the hegemony was coming, and humanity was ready to deliver the killing blow. The journey through the ghost path was the most harrowing experience of my life. We had stripped our force down to a surgical strike team, just a handful of ships, small and fast enough to slip past patrols. The Indomitable led the way, followed by the Defiance and a few of our best stealth corvettes. Every officer, every soldier aboard knew the stakes. The ghost path was a nightmare. Unstable wormholes that could rip a ship apart, gravitational anomalies that threw navigational systems into chaos, and asteroid fields so dense that even the best pilots struggled to maneuver through them. One wrong move, and we'd be nothing but debris. But we made it. Barely. The moment we emerged from the final jump, Zorvak Prime filled our view, a massive, sprawling world of towering black spires and glowing energy grids. It was the heart of the hegemony, the center of their power. And it was vulnerable. The planetary defense fleet was still present. Several dreadnoughts, dozens of cruisers. But they weren't expecting us. Their forces were stretched thin across the galaxy, fighting the very war we had ignited. Diaz let out a low whistle as he studied the screen. "This is suicide, you know that, right?" I smirked. "Only if we fail." Reynolds' voice came over the comms. "I hope you have a plan, Indomitable, because I don't think we're talking our way out of this one." "I do," I said, "and it's just as insane as everything else we've done." The only way to take the capital wasn't from orbit. It was from inside. "We fake a crash landing," I said. "Make it look like a rogue smuggler ship losing control on approach. We sneak in under their defenses, get boots on the ground, and take the central command tower." Diaz raised an eyebrow. "So we just walk into the most heavily defended city in the galaxy and kill their leaders?" Not just walk, I said. We bring a storm with us. I turned to Harrow. Are the insurgents in place? She nodded. Confirmed. We've got cells on the surface, ready to rise up as soon as we make our move. The plan was reckless. Insane. But it would work. Then let's end this. The Indomitable descended through the atmosphere like a meteor, fire trailing from its hull as we deliberately destabilized our engines. Hegemony defense scanners pinged us, but our false distress signal played across all frequencies. Emergency! Mayday! Losing control! We slammed into the outskirts of the capital, metal screeching, dust and debris exploding outward. The moment we hit the ground, the bay doors blasted open, and our forces poured out. We weren't alone. We weren't alone. Across the city, insurgents erupted into the streets. Former slaves, exiled warriors, and rebels who had been waiting for this moment. Explosions rocked the skyline as they struck military outposts, sabotaged power grids, and took control of strategic buildings. The city was falling into chaos. We moved fast. Our squad pushed through enemy lines, cutting down resistance with brutal efficiency. The hegemony had never faced ground warfare like this. Humans fought dirty, up close, and without hesitation. We reached the command tower, storming through its defenses. Hegemony guards, massive insectoid creatures, tried to hold their ground, but we cut through them. The final door stood before us, thick, reinforced, nearly impenetrable. Nearly. Reynolds slapped a breaching charge against it. Step back! The explosion rocked the tower, and we surged in. Inside, cowering behind security forces, was the Supreme High Chancellor of the Hegemony, Vorzal, the last true ruler of their empire. His mandibles trembled as he stared at us in disbelief. This is impossible, he hissed. I leveled my weapon at him. This is humanity. With one shot, I ended his reign. The fall of Zorvak Prime sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The hegemony, leaderless and fractured, collapsed within weeks. Their fleets surrendered. Their worlds declared independence. Their former slaves turned on them. The war was over. Humanity had done the impossible. We had defied an empire, and we had won. As I stood on the balcony of the former hegemony capital, looking out at a city no longer ruled by fear, Diaz stepped beside me. So, he said, smirking, what do we do now? I smiled. Now? We build because humanity wasn't just a survivor anymore. We were a power, and the galaxy would never forget it.